What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the Magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website. But as we did last week, and we are back this week, we are doing our traditional annual top 10 MTG stories of the year, this year being 2018. So as I said last week, we did numbers 10 through 6. You can go back and watch that if you missed it. But this week we are here for the finale at the close of the year for numbers 5 through 1. So without further ado, our number 5 MTG story of the year from Core Set 2019, the M19 stories, we had Chronicle of Bolas, Things Unseen. And as all of these stories were, this one was by Kate Elliott. This story in particular was one of the first, beginning, I think it was the fourth one or so. And so it was being told from Ugin's perspective. Because we had Naiva, Baishia, Yasova hearing these stories from Ugin's perspective, because Ugin had told the stories, and then those stories were then being retold to the women, and so now you have Ugin's story. And this is the story right after they stay with Arcades for a while, they being Ugin and Nickel, the twins. And Nickel leaves. And Ugin doesn't know where Nickel went. He doesn't know where he went. And so Ugin is now following Nickel, the only family that Ugin has, the only person, the only love that Ugin has ever had in his life. Familial love, of course, I'm not being weird. But you have Ugin kind of looking a little bit more familiar to us. He's in solitude. He's taking the time as he's traveling to look down at the world as he's flying. He's the way that the description is being given to us by Kate, he's seeing molecularly, on a molecular level, basically, and understanding the world as it is around him. He says he sees that the plants are breathing. Right? Things that we have all learned in school about how plants are alive and they provide us with oxygen by taking in the carbon dioxide that we breathe out. And so Ugin is now understanding this for himself. He is learning. He is taking in the world around him. And he realizes that all it really took was some quiet, some alone time for him to gather those things in. And that's very Ugin as we understand him today, but to see him coming to those realizations was really cool.
Yeah, kind of neat to sort of see how we got to that point. Lots of years of just kind of sitting around, not knowing the people who he was near because, he's plane hopping and whatever.
Right, well, this was before his spark.
Oh, okay.
This was before his spark, but he was going around with Nickel. They were learning to hunt all this time, living with Arcades and studying there and things like that. So he didn't really have a quiet moment to himself, except when he was studying, which again, kind of as he was studying with the human that he studied with, that was kind of the time that he had to learn that concept of quiet and meditation and etc.
Okay. I was thinking that this was a later story.
No. But there were some things that Ugin said, because, again, like I said, we see him emerging as we understand him today, but there are also parts of Ugin that show him not as we know him today.
Yeah.
He literally says, and I wrote this down, whatever happened to me, I couldn't let him die.
Right.
So that's a phrase from Ugin. Now, the him that Ugin is referencing is Nickel, his twin brother. Well, that's drastically different from today. Ugin is now setting tripwires in telepaths' brains to try to trap Nickel on another plane somewhere, i.e. Ixalan. Whereas back then, at this time, Ugin is saying, I cannot let him die. Again, he's his only family. He's the only one that Ugin has ever truly known. I mean, he's met Palladium Moors, he's met Arcades, but he knows Nickel. Right. He loves Nickel as his brother.
Right.
And so...
Pretty bitter.
Yeah.
Bitter taste.
Yes, exactly. And so finally finds Nickel in the world, traveled after him, found him, and we had seen a bit of this the story prior, but in this story, in the prior story, Nickel had seemingly used or started dabbling in some mind magic and had tricked a brother into killing his brother. Foreshadowing much, but
Right.
and yet after the brother did it, he was so upset. He was like, how could I have done that? I don't understand. Why did I do that? Well, because our good friend Nickel has begun to, gain some mind abilities.
Gigantic ass.
Yes. And so this is the episode, though, where we see, or the story, where we see a little bit of a hint, because it wasn't flat out told to us, but it was shown in the language that was used.
Oh, sorry.
God bless you. No problem. But we saw in the words that were used that Ugin was seemingly being, or at least Nickel was dabbling in attempting to influence Ugin here. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Not just because, but also because of the fact that now Nickel is doing this to his own brother, but also it's right after Ugin followed him all the way out here and said, no matter what, I cannot let my brother die.
Right.
And it's like, great way to repay your brother by, using your mind powers on him or testing your mind abilities on him. And
really, if he decided that it made sense to try and use it on Ugin, then he's already gotten it to a point where, he's pretty full of himself when it comes to controlling people's minds.
Right.
At this point.
Right.
Because he has the nerve to try it on Ugin.
Right. And it's the idea of, using it on a human is one thing, right? We've talked about, humans being so drastically different from dragons and not at the mental state of dragons as they were, even because these were just hunters, right? Or in Arcades' case, they were somewhat scholars, but that did not make them in any way resistant to mind manipulation.
Right.
And yet Ugin, like Amy was alluding to, is on a much different class and level, despite the fact that he is also family and someone that should be able to trust you.
Right.
And so you are really towing that line of...
And someone that you should be able to trust.
Correct.
Someone that you should be able to be okay with not using mind magic on.
Correct. And
how low are you that you're doing that? But also, how low has your relationship gotten with him? Or at least your side of the relationship with him.
Yeah.
That you think that you need to do that.
Right. And just like we saw hints of modern day Ugin in this story, towards the end we also get hints of modern day Nicol Bolas in this story, because you have Nicol talking about when the dragons were born. He, Ugin, and his siblings. And he starts saying, well, we were clearly the first. We are the first dragons. That's not... He doesn't know that. He doesn't know that, and he's just flat out lying about that information. And why? Well, because it makes him feel more important that way.
Right.
That's why he gave himself a second name in Bolas. Because all the other dragons had two names, but Ugin and Nicol, being twins and being from the same egg, had separate names for themselves, Ugin and Nicol, and then Nicol gave himself the name Bolas to make himself feel important as an individual, as opposed to having to be lumped in with his brother.
Right. He's just got a very bad inferiority complex.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Right.
But is true, right? It happened. And so, and the last thing I want to talk about with this story that made it so good, and my personal favorite part of the story, was the line that Ugin used where he said that something was that humans, or maybe it was Nickel even, but they were talking about the humans, and they said that they were small and weak as individuals, easily broken. That sentence, in and of itself, could be used to reference a million things. In the world of magic stories, not in the world of magic stories, but the concept of the fact that these dragons are saying this and feeling this way about humans, well, we find out from the humans interacting with dragons that the same could be said about dragons. That humans, when they come together, the dragons are the exact same way.
Right.
They were able to kill, the humans, the hunters, were able to kill Nickel and Ugin's sister, while the two of them had to stay there and watch because Nickel's leg was trapped, and, you know, and Ugin wasn't going to go in because he was there protecting Nickel. When the humans attack Nickel and Ugin at one point, Ugin gets hit, and there's some poison on there, which causes Ugin to bleed, and they have to kind of retreat because of that. And yet, Nickel is still trying to be an individual so much, and it's like, you are knowledgeable enough to talk about humans and say that they're small and weak as individuals and easily broken. You need to take your own advice.
Right.
And if you want to extrapolate further from that, you could look at the Gatewatch. The Gatewatch was formed because these planeswalkers were not going to be strong enough as individuals, and so they needed to gather together. Look at what we're coming up to in the Ravnica finale soon. You have a faction of planeswalkers in the Gatewatch and friends, and a faction of planeswalkers with Nicol Bolas's group. And so they're not doing this as individuals. They are coming together as a group. And so I loved that the concept of this story was that, or the line that was used in this story was that they are small and weak as individuals, easily broken. And I feel like there are just so many things that work so well with that.
Right.
That I needed to shout it out. It was that special to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. It was that typical to me.
Oh. Well, but I guess it was because of all of the things that it made me think of. All of the corner cases that could come up where this one sentence could reference it.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's why it felt typical to me.
Okay.
Because I feel like we've heard it so many times before in other stories.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not magic stories, but stories.
Okay.
Just, I feel like it's a very common theme to show up in stories.
Right. Well, and I mean, it goes to what the word that we mentioned a million times when reviewing the M19 stories, and that was parallels. Parallels between Neva and Baishia's story versus Nickel and Ugin's story. Parallels between Nickel's past and Nickel's present. Ugin's past and Ugin's present. And so this was just another example, but a very good one, of a parallel being drawn. And so I really appreciated that. So it was something that I brought up. And for that reason and all the other ones, that is why oh my goodness, why did Things Unseen. I was like, there are a lot of names in my head. But Things Unseen from Chronicle of Bolas is our number 5. So moving on to number 4, we have from Dominaria. We're still on Dominaria, folks. Return to Dominaria, episode 11.
Yes.
By, as all of them were, Martha Wells.
This was the best Dominaria story, for
Spoilers.
sure.
Spoilers. No more Dominaria, folks. But yes, this was definitely, and we had one last week, so if you missed last week, go check that out. But yeah, this was definitely the best one, and it was the penultimate one. Why was it the best one? Well, why wasn't it?
Or how wasn't it?
Right. It starts with you had two groups in this story. You had the group of Gideon and Chandra inside of the fortress, confronting Belzenlock. Gideon was going to get in there with the sword and deal with this. And then you had everybody else. Lily, the entire Weatherlight crew. They were on the Weatherlight.
Right.
and they ended up coming across Yargle. And I said everybody else, Teferi and Karn had gone with Chandra and Gideon, but had just helped them get in, and then they weren't like inside with them. So
they probably kept watch.
Wow. Even though neither of them were members of the Gatewatch yet.
But
yeah, so you had that moment of you're switching back and forth between the two groups to see what they're up to, what they're doing. And it's cutting back and forth. You hear a little bit about Chandra and Gideon, then it cuts to the Weatherlight. Then it cuts back to Chandra and Gideon, back to the Weatherlight. And on the Weatherlight, towards the beginning, I mean, they're fighting, right? There are liches, there are zombies that Liliana is raising, but they're also fighting Yargle, and Yargle is huge. His head was half the size of the Weatherlight, which is insane. And you have Joyra and Liliana talking to one another. And we mentioned this last week, but that relationship between those two was so fascinating to me because they're so different as people, as women, as, you know, characters in general, and yet they seemed to have a great relationship between the two of them. They are joking with each other even in these stressful situations. They are both, they may not look it, but they are both old women.
Yes.
They have both been around for a while. And so they have that.
Primarily probably the reason why.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I agree. And again, they both grew up on Dominaria, right? I mean, Lily left, but Joyra's not a planeswalker, so, and yet they've both spent most of their adult lives around ultra powerful people, planeswalkers and the like. And so they both have all of those things in common, and yet if they hadn't had this interaction, I don't think anybody would have clamored for it and said, why didn't these two talk to each other more? They have so much in common.
Well, not just the audience, but other characters. Like, I can't see Teferi being like, oh, you two should be close because, you know, you're similar.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Like, no one would ever think that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, but that was such a cool thing to read their interactions with one another and be like, oh yeah, because again, when you read a story and it makes you think of something that you hadn't really realized before, that's always really cool.
Right.
To have that moment, because a lot of times I feel like there are people who will read stories and they'll be like, oh, this is what's going to happen next, and then this, and then this, and then like that story was boring. And it's like, well, yes, because you were smart enough to have seen through the author's thought process, and you knew where they were going. So when you get hit with a surprise like that, that's always a nice feeling and a cool moment.
Yeah, because even people who would normally have it all figured out don't necessarily always have it all figured out.
Right, exactly. Oh, or genuinely they just come up with something that you wouldn't have thought of, or you weren't looking for to happen. So I thought that was really nice, and a good way, again, of making this Liliana's story. You're connecting her even with Joyra, who, if you didn't know the characters very well, and you were like, oh yeah, Liliana and Joyra, you know, talking to one another, you would not think that they were compatible.
No.
But when you delve deeper into their backstories and their pasts, it makes perfect sense. But that wasn't the only reason why this was our number 4. I mentioned earlier about the cuts back and forth, because that's how they decided to tell the story. Instead of doing, you know, one half, you just start with Chandra and Gideon and you work your way to the end of their story, at least for that moment, and then cut back to the Weatherlight, and then you use them until the end, and then you're done. They were cutting back and forth in different scenes. And at the end of each one of those scenes, I felt like it ramped up throughout the course of the story, where you cut away and you were like, oh, damn, you know, I really wanted to keep hearing about that. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. And then you get to the next story and you're like, oh, this is juicy though too. You know, this is cool.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. Great. And then they cut away and you're like, damn it, come on, man. Give me more of that. All right, fine. But now we're back to this thing that I really wanted to hear about.
Right.
And so it left you wanting more every time it cut away, up until the last moment of the story, where it left you wanting more for the next week. And now maybe...
It felt a lot to me like one of those like teenager soap operas, you know, where they have so many characters that they're just always bouncing around among all of them.
Oh, yeah.
And leaving open ends every single time so they can just circle back to that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, they did it in such a way where you were like, I want/need to know what happens next. And so you're ready.
You have to come back for the next episode the next week.
Right.
And the one after that.
Right.
And the one after that.
And interestingly, after 10 weeks prior of that not really being the case.
Not happening at all.
It was a welcome change.
Absolutely.
And not only a welcome change, but it just, that's how it made you feel when you read it, is you were like, I need to know what happens next. Oh, okay, well, we get to go to the other group, but we'll get back there eventually. But then at the end, you're like, no, damn it, come on, when's next week? You know, I need it to be next week. I need it to be a week from now so I can read next week's story. And finally, for this story, is Yargle. Let's talk about Yargle for a second, shall we? Yargle was considered a fan favorite character going in because of the flavor on the card, because of how he looked. Everybody loves him. Shout out to Loading Ready Run and their joke, and I'm sure they weren't the only ones, but Yargle being ready to bargle whenever you would play him out. He is a power 9 creature. And just so
He's
interesting.
He's not a power 9 card. Power 9 creature.
I mean, you know, they printed power 9. That's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Obviously.
Clearly.
Obviously.
Power creep.
When
power
you
9's
think
back.
power 9, you think Yargle.
Yes, 100%. 100%. And yet, again, as we discussed, the earlier stories were not as good. Some of them were fine, but most of them were not. And episode 10, for example, the one right before this one, was all about Slimefoot. Another fan favorite. And Slimefoot is a cool character. I will give you that. But as somebody reading the stories, as somebody reviewing the stories and coming back every week and looking forward to the stories, episode 9 was a ramp-up story. They started really getting into the meat of Dominaria and the conflict that the Weatherlight and the Planeswalkers were going to be coming up against.
Right.
And so we, as we mentioned, we were super excited because we were like, hey, next week, it looks like we're just ramping up and it's about damn time. It took them 9 weeks to get to something where we are interested, it's ramping up, and then the next week, it was Slimefoot. And it was
BS.
It was a damn brick wall of a story where they stopped, went all the way back to the beginning, and just told you Slimefoot's story throughout. And it was like, okay, we get it. Slimefoot is cool. People like Slimefoot, and I'm sure that people were quite happy to see that there was a Slimefoot story. I'm not saying that there should not have been a Slimefoot story.
But it should not have been episode 10.
Of 12. And so this one, episode 11, again, ramped it back up, left you wanting more after each paragraph.
Right.
But more importantly, it took a fan favorite character in Yargle and it did them justice.
Right.
When Yargle showed up, you were worried for the Weatherlight. You didn't know what was going to happen. Because, I mean, obviously Liliana's not going to die, right? Facing Yargle. Probably neither is... Right. I mean, probably neither is Joyra.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the Weatherlight is going to stay in the air. It doesn't mean that Raph is going to live, or Shauna, or Tiana, or Arvad, or something. Like, those characters didn't need to survive that encounter with Yargle, and so that idea of this is a problem, and they made it a credible threat.
Right.
They made Yargle a credible threat because everybody aboard the Weatherlight, when it was careening to the side and whatever, that was... you were worried. You were concerned, and the story made you care and think that this was actually going to be a tough fight. As opposed to, well, they're the Gatewatch, they have to be on Ravnica, and so they're going to win. Well, most of the Gatewatch weren't there, it was just Liliana, and it's not that difficult to conceive that she could survive a crash or get herself out of there and selfishly abandon everybody else.
Right.
And who knows what would happen. And so one of the main reasons why this story was as good as it was and is our number 4 is because it was able to follow a story about a fan favorite that was done poorly and take a different fan favorite and do it correctly.
Right.
So, moving away from Dominaria, we move to our number 3 story. And we go...
Ooh, the list is getting good.
we go, yes, it's top 3. We go back in time from Dominaria a little bit. From Rivals of Ixalan. And it is the best Rivals of Ixalan story. The Arbiter of Law left chaos in his wake, as the Rivals of Ixalan stories were. This is by the R&D narrative team. This story was about Azor.
Kind of.
Right. And in fact, it started with, and I wrote this down, we had been seeing a pattern with the rival stories. The first portion of the story was about the secondary characters. Your merfolk, your Sun Empire, right? You had Watley, you had Angrath, you had Tishana, Vona, Mavrin Fane, Kumena, etc. in the first portion of the stories, and then it went to Jason Veraska and what they were dealing with.
Sorry, I'm slowly sliding off of here.
And at the beginning of this story, you had the secondary characters, the tribes, fighting over the immortal sun. And like I said, those tribes were represented by Watley for the Sun Empire, Angrath for the pirates, Tishana for the River Heralds or the Merfolk, and Vona and Mavrin Fane for the vampires, for the Dusk Legion. And they're fighting one another, they're fighting amongst themselves, and then there is that moment of all 4 of them, not counting Mavrin Fane, all 4 of them touching the immortal sun at the same time to gain its powers. That was so cool. It was such a cool moment because it's like, yes, first of all, yes, 4 awesome characters touching this item at the same time. I mean, based on the cards, 4 mythic creatures and or planeswalkers touching this immortal sun, gaining its abilities. The immortal sun so powerful that Nicol Bolas of all people wants it. Mm-hmm. And so, amplifying their abilities, and all 4 of them are touching it at the same time. One member of each tribe, someone representing each tribe from Ixalan, all getting their hands on the immortal sun at the same time.
Right.
It was just a cool add-on. It's not even my favorite part of the story, but I just loved that moment of those 4 characters being at that immortal sun at the same time.
I feel like cool. I would have loved that moment more if it kind of equated to it ending up a more peaceful and unifying story. And because it didn't, mm-hmm. I feel like that moment could have meant so much more.
Okay.
I just feel like that moment was a great moment of all 4 sort of guilds.
Yeah.
I'll use the wordage from
Ravnica.
From Ravnica. But unifying to kind of touch this thing all at once. It could have been it could have led to something really cool. Right. And I think because it didn't, it really takes away from that moment. Yeah,
I guess that's a fair point. And so then once that...
For me.
Right.
Obviously.
And so once that portion of the story is over, I mean, first of all, then at the end of that portion of the story, then the floor falls out.
Yeah.
And they all just kind of fall. And that's where that's left. So again, talk about leaving you wanting more. It's like, again, they're probably not going to die. But still, what happened?
Kumena fell out the window, so...
Yeah, but he was saved. And so, what does that mean, right? What's going to happen next? Why did they all fall? Well, we don't get to find out that this time, but it was a cool way of being like, yes, even though you're probably all here for Jason Veraska, this was a cool moment and you should care.
Right.
And so, speaking of Jason Veraska, they meet Azor. And we meet Azor better now.
Ugh.
Amy's favorite.
Not something you want to do.
The Perun of the Azorius, which is how most of us would know him, but ancient planeswalker that he is, friend of Ugin, cohort of Ugin in making these plans against Nicol Bolas.
Yeah.
And you have him talking about himself. Because why wouldn't he? He's great.
Well,
so why wouldn't he talk about himself?
He's the only person that he's spent any time with for so long.
A very long time.
That how would he be able to talk about anything else?
A very long time. Apparently what we've learned over the years between Nahiri being stuck in rock for thousands of years and then also in the Hell Vault for that long of a period of time, and now with Azor being stuck in here and Saint Elenda as well, like, these characters are patient.
Yeah.
I get stir crazy, after like 2 hours of nothing to do.
That's been a running theme.
And that's what I mean.
Through Magic. I mean, your favorite, General Tazri.
Yeah.
She spent a lot of time in solitary confinement.
It's true. Or your girl, whose name I'm now not going to remember, Drana.
Drana, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a theme, but like, yeah, it's interesting that they all have this much patience. But we hear from Azor about, he's talking about how great he is. I go to other planes and I leave them law. I present them with law and then I leave. I've presented them a perfect system of law, and so they can't mess it up. So my job there is done and I go somewhere else. And Vraska, interestingly, I thought it would be Jace. Vraska is the one to present herself to Azor and have this discussion with him. And Vraska's like, you're a fool.
Yeah.
You present this system of law and government and whatever to these people, to these worlds, and then you leave. And you leave them in turmoil. And of course, Azor is not okay with that because he's like, nah, it's perfect.
Right.
I did it, so it's clearly perfect. There wasn't a flaw in that at all. And Vraska's like, no, you don't understand.
Well, the thing was, even if there wasn't a flaw in the system that he created and tried to put in place, if there's no follow through on that, then it's gonna be turmoil.
Right.
Like,
yeah, because you're not there to answer questions, corner cases, things like that of, well, what do we do here? What do we do
or to
now?
make sure that there's no outliers messing up the system and all kinds of variables. I mean, you can use history as an example. I mean, how many times has a country been colonized, or a coup d'etat happened, and then soldiers or a certain government took over for a period of time, and then like it didn't turn out the way it was supposed to, because people of who are indigenous to an area do not necessarily want to follow random person who just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, who are you?
Right. And or the system that they create is only as perfect as the implementation of that system.
Right.
And if they can't actually implement it and keep it that way, then it's all going to fall apart.
Right. And also, for certain systems of law to work, you have to have certain cultural assumptions associated with it.
Correct.
For those systems to even make sense.
Yeah.
And so for, like you said, for a colonized people to work within that system of law, there are a lot of assumptions that have to be made, and that's not always good. That doesn't always work. And and you add in what I will call the human element of people who are corrupt, people who are what have you, that your laws on paper working does not mean they work in practice. Even if they are spelled out appropriately and fully understandable, that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be willing to follow them or not look for loopholes in some way.
Right.
So that was the first thing, right? And Vraska is talking to Azor about that, and Azor is kind of unwilling to accept the fact that it could be anything less than perfect.
Well, and he also just doesn't understand the concept of those cultural differences making a difference. I mean, again, if you use a historical example, I mean, think of how different the cultures were between Native American tribes and European colonists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they couldn't have been more different.
Yeah.
And yet the Europeans came over and like expected things to be exactly how they were in Europe.
Right.
And the Native Americans were like, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, that's the way it's gonna be. Like, you can't just assume that the way that you think of things is the right way just because it's how you think of them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you are Azor, you know, the, I don't know, high and mighty Sphinx guy.
Yep. Which, his design I loved Azor's look. I thought he looked amazing. Just throwing that out there. But more importantly for the rest of this story, Vraska starts getting upset. Rightfully so.
Of course.
She's
I
a
mean,
little peeved.
Yeah, I mean, she's the one who's really taken a brunt of the badness of the system that Azor apparently put in place. So.
Yeah. And so you have that moment, and then she starts getting angry, and she starts thinking to herself, I'm gonna turn into stone. Like, I'm just gonna do it. He's pissing me off. I'm gonna turn into stone. This is it. And Jace steps up. Because Jace had kind of been in the background supporting Vraska,
right.
Not taking over, which is cool. You see more of that relationship between those two growing and changing.
Well, and that's why he calls her captain so much and stuff like that. So you can get a sense that she's the alpha.
Yes.
In that scenario.
Right, he's deferring to her, showing her that respect, despite the fact that, as we'll talk about it in a moment, but the power differential is probably not so much in that order. But Jace steps up and judges Azor.
Yeah.
Now, I said back then, and we haven't seen a Jace Planeswalker card since that moment, so it's still possible. I posited that, or some people said that it was his job as the Living Guild Pact, but...
That's a point.
But I was saying law magic and judging someone with magic is a white aligned ability. Could Jace be blue-white? Now, from spoilers that we have seen for Ravnica Allegiance, we know that, or seemingly we know, that the white-blue Planeswalker for that set is going to be Dovin Baan, which is sweet, don't get me wrong.
I love Dovin Baan.
Yes, he's great. He's really great. But I thought in that moment it was that cool concept of like, oh my god, Jace is using white-aligned magic. We've already seen Nissa go 2 colors.
Right.
Could we see Jace go 2 colors? So, and that still remains to be seen. It's still a possibility. But Jace judges Azor. Again, ancient Planeswalker. Granted, Azor's spark is in the Immortal Sun that we talked about earlier, but still ultra powerful mind, abilities, etc., telepathic abilities, and yet Jace judges Azor and handles him like that.
Yeah.
So easily.
Like a boss.
Yes. And I mean, honestly, don't forget, Jace just got his memories of Alhammarret back.
Right.
So Jace has been here before and knows that he's been here before, and yet...
tired of these big, mighty sphinxes meddling with everything.
And the last time Jace had a mind battle with a sphinx, he won, but not well. He did not do well.
I mean, he did it.
This time, it wasn't a battle.
Right.
It was a slaughter.
Right.
And some people that read this story were not happy with that. But it's our number 3. And the reason it's our number 3, or my main reason why I loved this story so much, is because it started us on a trend. A trend that we mentioned back when this story came out. You had to Gatewatch fight Nicol Bolas on Amonkhet during the Hour of Devastation story.
Even though your Palajani told him not to.
I mean, he tried real hard. But, and again, I say fought Nicol Bolas. The Gatewatch fighting Nicol Bolas was the same as Azor fighting Jace here. Because it wasn't a fight. And so what I said to Amy and what I said to all of you, if you watched that episode, was you need that moment of the Gatewatch getting new abilities or enhancing their present abilities, because otherwise the next time they fight Nicol Bolas, how and why would it be different?
Right.
There would be no difference. It would just be, well, it's been about a month. I guess it's time to go fight Bolas again. Why? Nothing has changed.
Right.
Well, this is what has changed. Jace has become this new version of himself. He remembers his Alhammarate training combined with his present day abilities. And we see that a bit with some of the illusions that he creates earlier on in the Rivals stories, but this was the moment. I said it then and I still believe it fully now. This was the moment where Jace takes down an ancient level planeswalker easily, wipes his mind and sends him off to an island to be the leader of that island. Useless island, in fact. And this is the first of many instances that we have seen since the fight with Nicol Bolas, where a member of the Gatewatch has increased their abilities and shown that increase in their abilities. And this was the first. And it was an amazing moment where you got that power from Jace. You got the sense of that power from Jace in being able to look at Azor and just handle him. Because of how he was treating Vraska, because of how he was thinking of himself, and the fact that he was not listening to reason, and Jace just chose to make that stop.
Right.
And he was able to do so with seemingly very little effort, and then just move on to the next thing that he and Vraska were going to do.
Right.
To me, that is so cool, and it shows, like, I am definitely looking forward to seeing Jace come across Nicol Bolas and or Tezzeret and or whomever, Ralzeric, and see what he does with those people now. Characters now. With these new abilities and what he can truly do now that he has been unchained. So, those are the reasons why. The longest title, I think, to date in the Magic stories, and even since. That's why the Arbiter of Law left chaos in his wake from Rivals of Ixalan is our number 3. We're up to top 2, folks. Top 2.
Home stretch.
Yes. And our number 2 is from Chronicles of Bolas. It is from the Core Set 2019 stories. And this is Chronicle of Bolas Perspectives by Kate Elliott, once again. This is the first story where Baishia and Naiva and Yasova are in the same general area as present day, or at least as close to present day as we've seen him in these stories, Nicol Bolas.
Nicol Bolas.
And you have Naiva meet up with Nicol Bolas. Now, we've talked about this before. Naiva and Bolas are parallels of one another. They are themselves personified in different ways, right? Naiva is Bolas, but younger and kind of having those same thoughts and feelings and etc. about her twin, Baishia. And we get to see those hints of Bolas manipulating Naiva. Because Naive is saying, like, oh, well, my sister thinks she's so great and she gets everything and she's so good and, you know, I hate her. Maybe if I attacked her when she wasn't looking, or why do I have to help her? That's not... It was low. We're like, oh, I guess she gets to just do that because she's a shaman and I'm not. And so I get it, you know, but I'm a hunter. I'm still really good. And it just builds. And now that they are near one another, you have Bolas stepping up and seemingly asserting that control before actually physically presenting himself to her and talking to her. And again, like all of the other stories were, this particular story had Bolus telling a story to Naeva so that we could get that kind of flashback element. And you have Naeva trying to manipulate Bolus back. Now, she doesn't know that he's manipulating her, and I find it hard to believe that Bolus doesn't know that he's being manipulated, but it really doesn't seem like it with the way that the story is talking about it. But Naeva is attempting to stall for time.
Right.
So that Beishia can finish her visions of Ugin's life, and Ugin's travels through the multiverse, and Yasova can get to Beishia, and etc. And so Naeva is the only one confronting Nicol Bolas right now and listening to his story.
Right. But how many, evil, full of themselves kind of villains have we seen in stories in the past that are, they're full of themselves. So if you're flattering them or you're listening intently,
Oh yeah.
To their life story, they're going to sit there and say it.
Yep.
They're not going to realize that they're being manipulated by you.
Right, because they think so much of themselves
right.
that you want to hear about them. It's your pleasure to hear about their lives.
And clearly you couldn't manipulate someone like that.
Exactly. But most interestingly about this story, and the reason that it's called Perspectives is because, as you may have been able to guess, this story is now being told from Nicol Bolas's perspective. And now Nicol Bolas, we talked about it earlier, right? Bolas, when he was telling his story in the flashback that Ugin was reiterating, Bolas is saying, well, we were the first dragons to fall. That's not true. You're manipulating history there. So it's not too far-fetched to think that when Bolas says things like, oh, Ugin said we were twins, he's lying. I fell first, I was by myself, Ugin fell after me and I taught him everything he knows.
Right.
That's probably a lie,
right?
That does not sound like the truth. But, and there were lots of different things. There was, when Ugin shows up from his planeswalk, shows up on Dominaria after the Elder Dragon War, and Nicol is bragging about his experiences during the Elder Dragon War and what cool things he's done, and look, Ugin, I'm going to take over this whole world. And Ugin's like, you have no idea what you're saying.
Right.
You are, first of all, thinking so small that this world is nothing. I've seen hundreds of worlds over thousands of years, and you think that this place matters.
Right.
You are so small-minded, and then Ugin kind of planeswalks away when Nicol doesn't get it. But Nicol explaining this to Naeva says that Ugin shows up, doesn't appreciate his twin, or his brother, not his twin, because Bolas doesn't say they're twins, but doesn't appreciate his brother, and then because they're on top of a mountain, Ugin just walks off and fades away into the snow. Doesn't planeswalk away directly in front of Bolas's eyes, but walks away and the snow obscures him, and he's a coward and he leaves. And then Bolas gets to say that he was the first planeswalker ever, because he doesn't believe when Ugin talks about planeswalking.
Right. Or he does believe it, and he's just so insecure that he's got to pretend that he doesn't.
Correct. But it's called Perspectives. Some of what Nicol said, or what I guess at this point he's Bolas, what Bolas said is believable. It's possible that those things could have happened. It's possible because those stories were being told from Ugin's perspective. Who's to say Ugin's not embellishing?
Right.
And that Bolas is telling the truth? Who's to say maybe neither of those stories are accurate and it was something in between? Or something way off and not even close to that? This story, the 7th of 8 stories, made you question everything you heard in the first 6.
Right.
Everything. And it was done so well. Because if it truly did retcon it all, right? Because people were like, wait, like when the first story came out, Some hardcore Vorthos were like, wait, now they're trying to say that Ugin and Nickel were twins? That doesn't make sense. If they wanted to, with this story, they could have retconned that entirely.
They could have retconned a lot of things.
But if Bolus is telling the truth, they're not twins. Ugin said that they were twins. Maybe they're not. We just assume that that's the truth because that's what we were told.
Right.
And then in the 7th story, 7 weeks later, 6 weeks later, we hear something completely different. Well,
and I think the point of this story was really just to say, we never knew that they were twins, and now we know that they're twins.
Mm-hmm.
Or, why are they saying they're twins? They were never twins. The point is that we may never know what the truth is. All we know is each person's side of the story.
yep. Because
and we kind of have to determine for ourselves what the truth is.
Because the other Elder Dragons aren't around anymore to know the truth. So the only people left who know the truth are Ugin and Bolus, and both of them have a stake in wanting one or the other to be the truth as
Right.
everyone understands it around them.
Yeah.
And so it was such a great moment because you literally went back to all of those other stories, which were also very good. So you get to think back to those good stories and you get to realize, holy crap, what does this mean? What is this trying to tell us? Was Ugin truthful about any of it? Is Bolus being truthful about any of it? And it left a lot of questions, which in a good way. Sometimes if a story leaves questions and then doesn't answer them, that's bad.
Right.
That's very bad because you've left your readers wanting more and then you just never deliver.
Leave them high and dry.
Right. And then you just never deliver. In this case, it's not really leaving them wanting more. It's you're blatantly giving them the chance to decide for themselves.
Right.
Who do you believe more?
And,
Do you believe Ugin? Do you believe Nicol Bolas?
And that's what made this title the perfect title for this story.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it was, okay, you got these two very specific perspectives
Yep.
on the same story or the same life. I mean,
Yeah.
the same two lives that were joined kind of together.
Yeah.
Two very different perspectives on that. Now, what's your perspective on it?
Yep.
Because realistically, those two are so different from one another that you really do have to determine for yourself what you think is the truth, or decide on a more fundamental level, I guess,
Yeah.
that what is actually the truth no longer matters, because all that's left is what the people who are left think and how they've perceived what has happened.
Right.
So maybe what the truth is or was doesn't actually matter anymore, because all that still exists so many years later is people's perception of what really happened.
Yes, exactly. And we talked about that a bit, I think, last week with Angrath and Watley as well. And speaking of perspectives, the last thing I wanted to talk about with this particular one, and then we'll move on to number one, don't worry, is that there was a moment in this story where Bolus is talking about Arcades. And Arcades, as we saw, is the leader, the lord, whatever you want to call him, of a city or a town on Dominaria. And Bolus says, wow, you are so small-minded, you just want to control one city? I'm going to take over this whole world. That's funny. That sounds real familiar.
Right.
That sounds real familiar.
I wonder.
Yeah, and it's true. You had that moment of, and I'm sure many people have seen this happen in stories, movies, television shows, etc., but also in real life, where there's that story of like, somebody takes a bunch of crap at work and then comes home and kicks their dog because everyone wants to have that, or not everyone wants, that's not fair. some people want to have that feeling of superiority.
Right.
And if they do not get that from their day-to-day lives, they will find someone to be their, you know, their receptacle for that. The not so nice phrase is, you know, shit rolls downhill.
Right.
And so if you're at the bottom of the hill, you're going to take a lot of it. Whereas if you're at the top, you get to drop a lot. And this was an instance of Ugin having seemingly, at least from our perspective, having the moral high ground and saying to Nicol Bolas, you have no idea. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, you think what you're doing is great, but you have no idea.
Right.
And Bolas, having had that said to him, now turns around and is like, well, look at Arcades. He sucks. He just cares about that one town or that one city, and that's all that matters to him. What an idiot. Okay, Bolas, sure. Good for you, pal. You did it. Like, and so that was another example of the parallels that are being drawn. I mean, how many times do I have to say it for the M19 stories? Well,
Yeah.
probably about one more time. Because our number one story of 2018 is from Chronicle of Bolas. It is The Unwritten Now. To give credit where it is due, once again, by Kate Elliott. The Unwritten Now, if you do not recall, is the finale from the Corset 2019 stories. And there was a lot to talk about with that one. First of all, little nice little thing that was added in. We get from one of them planeswalking. I do not recall which one, Ugin or Nicol Bolas. They mention some of the planes that they've gone to. One of them being a plane called Kephalia. Kephali. We are not familiar with that plane. That is another. Add it to the list. Add it to the list of planes that we want to go to see future sets, right? Vryn, Chandelar, things like that, of like planes that we've barely visited or we haven't visited at all, and now we want to see them. Well, now we have at least a name of a new plane that was dropped in this story. That was a really cool Easter egg, because if they go back to that plane, this is literally the only thing we have, is the mention of that plane that Ugin or Nicol has been there previously. That's all we know. Still, really cool to just have that, and you know, if you're paying enough attention, something that you remember.
Right.
Now, we're back to Bolas talking to the twins, talking to Naeva, really, but with the twins and Yasova. And Bolas keeps saying, where is Ugin? Because we know that Baeshia is down in Ugin's, like, you know, meditation plane-esque area.
Right, his little hole.
Right, gaining all of his memories or viewing all of his memories. Mm-hmm. But Bolas doesn't know where it is. Naeva does. And Bolas keeps saying, where is Ugin? Where is he? Tell me where he is.
Right.
And Naeva keeps responding, Ugin's dead.
Right, like, I don't know what you're talking
right.
about.
You've said it yourself. We know it. We've known it for a very long time. Ugin's dead. And keeps repeating it over and over and over again, which is so cool. It was such a great through line through this story of Naeva just constantly, but why? He's dead. Why is that?
Well, that's what you do when you're in a bind. And you can't answer the question truthfully. You just, you know, you just keep repeating the same lie.
Yes. And now we get to, I mean, we had this.
Eventually they'll get tired of asking.
Right. And I forgot to mention with perspectives, when we get back to Naeva and Baeshia, Naeva has been manipulated so much, she ends that story with a knife to Baeshia's throat.
Yeah.
Because
that's the end of the story. It's terrifying.
To her twin. And so now we're in the final story, and it really is that you would think, like, oh my god, it's going to be, you know, Naeva versus Baeshia, or Yasova's going to be there too.
Oh my god, like, she's going to die. Right. And then we're going to have to see her, you know, freak out when she realizes what she's just done. And,
right.
And
yet
that's not how it went.
No. But one thing that we did see, finally, was an encounter. And it's not the one that I expected to see. If you were going to tell me that in the Corset 2019 stories we would see a fight between Nicol Bolas and Ugin, I would have thought you meant the kind of Fate Reforged-esque fight where the two of them are fighting and Ugin gets killed or then saved by Sarkin based on time travel or whatever. That's not what we saw. We saw these two brothers, these two twins. Now Perspectives puts that into question, but these two brothers fighting one another on the meditation plane. And Ugin knows.
So cool.
Yes, very cool. Now Ugin knows though. Ugin can't win this fight. Ugin's an intellectual. We know that. He's not a fighter. Nickel has spent all those thousands of years where Ugin was training. Nickel was winning a dragon war.
Right.
So Nicol Bolas knows how to fight dragons. Ugin does not. He could be strategic, but he knows he's not going to beat Bolas. He can't, and he knows he can't.
Gee, it's almost like the two of them probably should have been working together or something to accomplish the same goal.
Yeah. Weird. Pig-headed brothers. That doesn't sound like a thing that's real. So, you have that moment of Ugin kind of accepting his fate and being like, there's nothing I can do. Let me go to the meditation plane. Instead of fighting on some other plane that we could ruin, at least we'll go to this meditation plane and nobody else will get hurt.
Right.
And so the two of them fight, and Bolas leaves Ugin's body lying face down in the meditation plane, and then leaves. Planes walks away, and is like, well, this is done, and is sad and leaves. And then we see Ugin go from Ugin to Ugin the Spirit Dragon. Because something else that I really hadn't thought of was wanting to know how he became the Spirit Dragon. I just hadn't thought of, maybe I just wasn't thinking enough, and I should have been wanting to know, but it hadn't really crossed my mind. I guess I just kind of assumed that that's just how Ugin looked, and especially because we had no art from Core Set 2019 of what Ugin looked like pre Spark igniting or pre Spirit Dragoning. Because we had
Spirit Dragoning.
Yep, it's a verb now.
Yeah.
But we had the Nicol Bolas flip card, but we didn't have the Ugin flip card, and a lot of people asked for it and were upset as to the fact that it wasn't there. But it's because it allowed for this awesome moment, and I've said many times, it's a little upsetting when the cards spoil the story that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this time it didn't. If we had had that flip Ugin card, it probably would have looked very different than either Ugin the Spirit Dragon or from front face to back face when they flipped over. And so now we know how Ugin became the Spirit Dragon, and it was such a cool moment that he just is resurrected and there's also again a question. Did he know that was going to happen? Or did he resign himself to, I'll die, but it'll at least be on my meditation plane?
Right.
Who knows? Was he smart enough to understand the meditation plane and understand its ability to resurrect him and bring him back like that? Maybe we'll never know.
Very cool.
Yes. And that's kind of it for the story of the brother dragons. And then we get back to Yasova and her granddaughters. And throughout this story, we saw a theme of the end doesn't equal death, and vice versa.
Right.
Because we just talked about that with Ugin. He died, and yet Ugin the Spirit Dragon.
Right.
So death is not the end, and the end doesn't mean death. And yet we see Yasova, for the first time in all 8 of these stories, she's old.
Yeah.
And we knew that based on...
taken its toll.
Right. And I mean, we knew that based on some of the descriptions of her, and yet with those removed, with the discussions of her age and the fact that she's a grandmother removed, the things that she was doing, the way that she was presenting herself and stepping up into the face of danger so often, you wouldn't know her age.
Right.
And yet in this story where you see Beishia and Naiva really stepping up and really kind of finding their birthright almost in their abilities and what they were able to accomplish, it's almost like Yasova is aware of that and is able to let herself feel that her age for a bit.
Right.
Because she doesn't have to be as strong as she has been.
Right. We really learn that is her purpose.
Right.
Because once things start to get to a point where she realizes she can let go of those reins a little bit and let the girls do what they need to do, and the whole situation kind of comes to a close, she can just be old now.
Yeah, and like actually enjoy her older years and not have to worry about being in charge all the time.
Right, she can just retire.
And the other thing that was really great from a meta perspective, but also just from a story perspective, is the fact that they are the three of these women and any other tribe members that may have survived are now in this area with the relics from their tribe. And one of those things is Yasova talking about cataloging their story. There are many stories down here from the past of the tribe, and Yasova is saying these stories that we have heard of Ugin, of Nickel, of the Elder Dragon War and the past and etc. These stories are going to be cataloged, and they're going to be cataloged for future generations to find and to use and to learn from. And again, from a meta perspective, we are reading these stories, so that's one thing. But also just the idea of they all went through something. We all went through something in getting to read those stories, and it is important to catalog that kind of an experience for the future, so that you know your past, right?
Yeah.
There are more metaphors in that concept than I could probably make this video twice as long, and all of you are going, no, God, it's so long already.
Right.
Trust me, I've been
Like,
sitting here
just
talking,
shut
I know.
up.
Yeah. So, for all of those reasons, that is why the finale of the Core Set 2019 stories, Chronicle of Bolas, The Unwritten Now, is our #1 story, MTG story of 2019.
Yeah,
I wanted to give a quick shout out to Brandon Sanderson and Children of the Nameless. It was released this year. Technically it counts, but we didn't put it into the running because it was, 1, so close to the end of the year, 2, it was a novella, but 3, we haven't had a chance to dive into it enough and know the impact of it enough to know if it was worthy of going on the list. If you want to add it to the list, to your list, please feel free. And if you weren't here last week or you didn't watch last week's episode, we want you to give us your top 5.
Right.
If you didn't do it last week, give us your top 10. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed your holidays. Hopefully you all have a happy and a healthy 2019 new year. Thank you so much for any and all of 2018 that you hung out with us for. We are planning to keep going strong in 2018, where we join you in showing off our
#Vorthos Pride.
last time in 2018. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much for allowing us into your homes, into your cars, or your commute, or wherever it is that you watch us. We really appreciate it. We really hope you enjoyed. Thank you for sticking it out. This has been a very long video, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it was relevant to you and what you like. And please let us know your thoughts, your list in the comments down below. Here from the Geek for All YouTube channel for the last time in 2018, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, guys, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks so much, everybody.